I want to start today by reading something I wrote down right after an experience I had. It framed everything we're about to talk about. Here it is. I was at a dinner party in Palo Alto last week, sitting across from a guy who's made a career out of AI safety, one of those professional warriors who talks about existential risk like it's a lifestyle brand. He spent 20 minutes explaining why we need to slow down, why unmetered compute is a threat to the social fabric, and why only a few responsible corporations should be allowed to hold the keys to the heavy silicon. He spoke with this quiet, smug authority as if he were the one personally holding the brakes on history itself. But then the conversation shifted to NVIDIA's announcement of the Rubin architecture. Someone mentioned the specs. 50 PFLOPS of inference and the 22 terabytes per second of bandwidth that effectively kills the dependency on centralized API tokens. The guy's reaction was wild. He didn't look concerned for the planet. He looked personally insulted. He started snapping about regulatory bypass and how it was irresponsible to put that much power into unvetted hands. He wasn't afraid of a rogue AI. He was afraid of a rogue individual with a fast enough motherboard. It was a perfect window into the D-cell mind. The sudden pivot from protecting the world to protecting the monopoly was so sharp it almost gave me whiplash. It made me realize that the debate isn't actually about ethics, it's about thermodynamics. One side wants to manage the heat death of our civilization with red tape, while the other is building the bootloader for superintelligence. The leap from Blackwell to Rubin isn't just a hardware upgrade, it's a theological shift. It's the moment where the safety priesthood realizes that the cognitive fire they've been trying to hoard is finally being handed out to everyone. We're witnessing the birth of sovereign compute, and for the people used to being the universe's censors, it is their worst nightmare come true.
Wow. You know, that's a very dramatic way to describe a dinner party argument.
It felt that dramatic. The vibe shift was palpable.
I believe it. But when you strip away the Silicon Valley melodrama, that diesel guy, the decelerationist, he wasn't entirely wrong about the magnitude of what's happening.
Oh, how so?
He was just wrong about his ability to stop it. That's the thing. He sees the tsunami coming.
He seems to think he can build a wall out of policy papers. He sounded so convinced that if he just wrote enough sternly worded documents, he could put the genie back in the bottle.
And that's the theological crisis you just read about. He thinks this is a policy debate. It's not. It's a physics problem.
A physics problem.
Yes. We're not just talking about a faster graphics card here. The Rubin architecture, combined with what we're seeing in memory density, in energy production, it represents a fundamental collision between two worldviews.
Okay.
It is a collision between those who think safety comes from centralized control, from choke points, and what we're calling the thermodynamic imperative.
The thermodynamic imperative. That sounds like a law of physics, not a business strategy.
In a way it is. It's the natural drive for any complex system, any civilization, to expand its energy consumption and its computational complexity right up to the absolute limits of physics.
And you can't legislate against physics.
You can't. So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly why your dinner guest was so scared. We're going to look at the NVIDIA Rubin specs, this whole concept of sovereign AI, and the physical limits of our civilization as, defined by things like the Kardashev scale.
Okay, let's ground this for a moment because we do have a stack of sources here. We've got NVIDIA technical papers, reports on this HBM4 memory war, analysis on nuclear-powered data centers. It's a lot of jargon.
Yeah.
Why does any of this matter to someone who isn't, trying to build a God computer in their basement?
Because the God computer, as you call it, is leaving the basement. It's becoming the infrastructure of the world. And the common thread here, the thing that ties it all together, is autonomy. Autonomy for the individual, autonomy for the nation state, and maybe even autonomy for the species.
Let's start with the individual then, because that was the trigger point at dinner. Unvetted hands, regulatory bypass, it was all about the individual.
Right.
I want to tell you a story I found while digging into some encrypted developer forums last night. It frames this perfectly. It's about this woman, Elena.
A developer, a researcher.
She calls herself a data librarian, and she lives in a jurisdiction, I won't say where, but let's just say digital speech there is very heavily curated by these things they call safety committees.
Right. So censored.
Heavily. If you ask the state-approved AI about certain historical events or, political theories, you get a completely lobotomized response. You know the kind. I cannot answer that. Or just generic, sanitized boilerplate.
That standard centralized control. The model weights are hosted on a server owned by a corporation that has to comply with local laws. The turnstile, the choke point.
Exactly. And Elena was just sick of it. She wanted the raw data. But for years, she was stuck. Because to run a truly smart model, something that could actually reason through complex history, not just parrot text, she needed the cloud. She had to ping a server in California or London or somewhere else.
The API dependency.
Yes. But recently, she posted about her new setup. She said she managed to secure a private server rack powered by the Vera Rubin architecture.
Ah, so the Rubin platform. Not Blackwell, but the next generation.
The next gen. And she said something that really caught my eye. She said she's running a ghost node.
A ghost node.
And when the local regulators tried to implement a compute kill switch at the ISP level, basically trying to block people from accessing unauthorized AI APIs, it failed on her end.
Why?
Because she wasn't using an API. She was running a frontier-grade model completely offline on her own hardware.
In her?
Wow.
Right there.
Yeah.
That is the pivot point. That is exactly what your dinner guest is terrified of.
But help me understand the tech here. We've had local LLMs for a while. You can run Llama 3 on a MacBook if you compress it enough. Why is this ghost node so different? Why does the Rubin architecture suddenly make her sovereign?
It all comes down to the bottleneck.
Yeah.
It's always about the bottleneck. In the previous era, so the Blackwell chips, the H100s before that, you had a brutal trade-off.
Okay.
You could run a model locally, sure, but it had to be small. It had to be, frankly, kind of dumb. If you wanted what we call agentic reasoning, a model that can plan, think multiple steps ahead, handle massive context.
That's smart stuff.
The really smart stuff, yes.
Yeah.
You needed a cluster. You needed a warehouse full of GPUs. And you can't put a warehouse in your basement.
So the smarts were too big for the boss.
The smarts were too big for the pike. That's the critical distinction.
Yeah.
This is where the Vera Rubin specs really matter. You mentioned 50 petaflops of inference performance, which is an absurd amount of math speed.
Right.
But the number that changes the game, the number that creates the theological crisis, is the bandwidth. 22 terabytes per second.
22 terabytes per second. I genuinely cannot get my head around that number. What does that even mean in practical terms?
Okay, think of it this way. Imagine the AI's brain is a massive library, the entire Library of Congress. In the old system, the processor, the part that does the thinking, was connected to that library by a drinking straw.
Okay, a drinking straw.
It could only pull a few words at a time. If it wanted to understand a whole book, let alone a whole section of the library, it took forever. It was constantly waiting. That's why you had to use the cloud. The cloud uses massive, incredibly expensive optical cables to bond thousands of chips together to create a wider straw.
So the cloud is just a big bundle of straws.
A very, very expensive bundle of straws. But with Rubin, NVIDIA basically put a fire hose inside the single chip package. 22 TBs is enough bandwidth to feed the processor the entire library almost instantly.
So it's not waiting anymore.
It's never waiting. It effectively kills the dependency on centralized API tokens because you don't need the cloud's multi-billion-dollar infrastructure to get that throughput anymore. You can have a supercomputer level of throughput in a single rack, like their NVL72 system.
So Elena doesn't need to ask OpenAI for permission to think.
She doesn't need to ask anyone for permission to think. The Vera CPU she's using, which is part of the Rubin platform, has 88 custom Olympus cores. These are ARM-based, but they're designed specifically for this kind of agentic reasoning.
So it's not just a chatbot that predicts the next word.
Not at all. It's a system that can hold a complex goal like analyze this entire censored historical archive and cross-reference it with foreign intelligence reports and identify inconsistencies and just execute it without hallucinating, without stalling, because it's never waiting for data.
And because the bandwidth is so high, it happens in what feels like real time.
Faster than real time.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to the theology of it, the whole decel mindset, the safety-first argument. It relies on an unspoken assumption. That high-level intelligence will always be scarce and hard to distribute. They assume you need a billion-dollar data center to run a dangerous thought.
And Rubin says, here's a data center you can fit in a van or a basement.
Exactly. Yeah. If you can run a superintelligence in a ghost node, the safety priesthood loses its entire reason for being. They can't gatekeep knowledge if they don't own the turnstile.
And these things can talk to each other, right? The individual chips.
Oh, yeah. With NVLink 6, which provides 3.6 TBs of bandwidth per GPU, you can connect a rack of these chips so they act as one giant coherent brain. If that brain is sitting in Elena's private residence, uncensored and disconnected from the grid, well, that represents a total loss of control for any central authority.
That's incredibly liberating, but I mean, it's also a little terrifying. My dinner guest wasn't totally crazy. A rogue individual with that much raw power could do some real damage.
Perhaps, but the alternative is that only a few approved corporations and governments get to think at that level. The Rubin architecture renders that debate almost moot. The hardware exists, the genie is out.
But there's a catch. There's always a catch.
There's always a catch. And the catch is thermodynamics.
Right, energy.
You cannot run a 50 petaflop brain on an AA battery. Intelligence is physical. It consumes power, and it generates heat. And this leads us to the second major constraint that is now finally beginning to break down.
Which brings me to the second story I wanted to share. This one is about a guy named Kalen. He's a mechanical engineer, lives somewhere out in the Midwest.
Okay.
I stumbled across this video log he posted. He wasn't in a basement with a server rack. He was standing in a field. And behind him was this sleek, humming structure. It looked like a piece of high-end industrial art.
Yeah, was it?
He said it was a modular nuclear reactor.
A small modular reactor.
An SMR.
Right. And directly connected to, they were literally wired into the same housing, was a compute cluster. He called the sound it made the thermodynamic hum of civilization waking up.
I like that. He was talking about FLOPS per joule, and how even though the Rubin chips are wildly efficient, the sheer demand for compute is so high that you have to build the power plant inside the computer.
He's describing direct coupling. And he is 100% right. This is the only viable solution to the energy compute trap.
Explain that trap, because usually when we talk about data centers, we talk about them crashing the power grid, that they are a huge problem.
That is the trap. The OSTI report we reviewed for this deep dive makes it terrifyingly clear. Data centers are projected to increase U.S. energy demand by 24 to 74 gigawatts electric by 2028.
74 gigawatts.
Our current grid cannot handle that. It's not a question of maybe. It physically cannot transmit that much power to the places that need it. The grid is the new bottleneck.
So Kalen's solution is to just go off-grid, build his own.
His solution is to become the grid. Kalen, in his video, views this as humanity literally climbing the Kardashev scale.
The Kardashev scale. Okay, that's the type I, type 2 civilization thing, right? Where we rank civilizations by energy use.
Exactly. A type I civilization is one that can harness and use all of the energy available on its home planet, which is roughly 10 to the 16th power watts.
And where are we now?
Right now, Earth is about a type 0.7. We are, to be blunt, energy poor. We are still burning dead plants and hoping the lights stay on.
And Kalen thinks these chips are the ladder to get to type I?
He thinks they're the forcing function. You see, we looked at that wild paper, the Moonshine Roadmap.
The one about the moon?
Yes. It argues that to get to type I in the next 20 years, we need a radical shift. It talks about lunar ISRU, that's in situ resource utilization.
Mining the moon.
Mining the moon to build massive solar collectors and then beaming that powder back to Earth via a hybrid laser microwave transmission system.
Okay, hold on. That sounds like pure science fiction. Lasers from the moon. We can barely fix the potholes in my street. Why is this in a deep dive about NVIDIA chips?
Because you cannot manage a planetary scale energy grid with human operators in a control room. It's impossible. To coordinate a laser microwave transmission network from the moon, targeting collectors on Earth, requires split-second, quantum-accelerated decision-making. You need a moon node.
An AI?
You need massive AI orchestration. Kalen understands the feedback loop. If we want the intelligence, the AI, we need the energy, which means nuclear and massive solar. And if we want that much energy, we need the intelligence just to manage it all. One requires the other.
Who's the guy at dinner, the one who wants to slow down AI development?
Yeah.
He's also effectively saying we should stay a type 0.7 civilization forever.
Precisely. The D-cell mindset is fundamentally a scarcity mindset. They want to ration energy. Don't train that model. It burns too much coal. The accelerationist view, Kalen's view, is that we don't reduce the thinking to match the battery. We build a bigger damn battery. We build nuclear reactors.
And this isn't just one guy in a field, right? This is happening at the corporate level. This is real.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't sci-fi. It's a procurement strategy. The report we have mentions Kairos Power and X Energy. These are companies building SMRs reactors the size of a shipping container.
And who is buying them?
Amazon. Google. They're signing procurement deals directly. They aren't just buying carbon credits anymore. They're becoming nuclear operators. They've done the math and realized that if they rely on the public grid for their future data centers, they die. So they are building their own thermodynamic sovereignty.
So Elena has her sovereign brain in the basement, and Kalen has his sovereign halt, the power source, in the field. But there's one more piece of the puzzle.
Money.
Money. Even if you have a reactor, these chips aren't free. This technology sounds prohibitively expensive for most people.
No, it's not. Or rather, it won't be for long. The cost of thinking, the cost per operation, is crashing faster than anyone predicted. And that is because of the brutal knockdown, drag-out war happening in South Korea.
You mean the HBM4 memory war? It sounds like a generic action movie title.
It's a full-blown industrial thriller, and it directly explains the story of Amara.
Right, Amara. She's an entrepreneur in Lagos. I read a case study on her startup. She's building a complex water purification simulation, trying to optimize filtration systems for local conditions in Nigeria. But she had this problem she called token anxiety.
Token anxiety.
Yeah.
I think every developer on the planet knows that feeling. You're afraid to hit enter on your code because you know that API call is going to cost you 50 cents or $1.
Exactly. She said she was literally rationing her own curiosity. She wouldn't run the most complex reasoning chains because it was just too expensive. But then, she said, almost overnight, the inference costs dropped by a factor of 10.
10 times.
She started running millions of iterations for the price of a coffee. She said it felt like the great stagnation that economists talk about just ended, for her anyway.
It ended for her because the memory wall finally fell.
Okay, we absolutely need to geek out on this for a second. We talked about bandwidth earlier, the 22 TBs. But what is HBM4 specifically, and why is it causing an industrial war?
So HBM stands for high bandwidth memory. For the last decade, this has been the real problem. The chips, the GPUs, got faster and faster, but the memory couldn't keep up. The GPU was like a Ferrari engine stuck in city traffic. It spent half its time just waiting for data to arrive from memory.
The memory was the bottleneck.
The memory was the wall. HBM4 is the 4th generation, and it does something radical. It widens the physical interface to 2048 bits.
So doubling the lanes on the highway for data?
Yes. That's a huge part of it. But the real revolution, the specific reason Amara's cost drops so dramatically, is the logic-based die.
The logic-based die. Break that down for me.
In the old HBM stacks, you had layers of memory chips, one on top of the other. In the very bottom, there was a dumb piece of silicon. It was just a base with wires to connect the stack to the GPU.
Just a connector.
Exactly. In HBM4, that base layer is replaced with an actual logic chip built on a modern 5-nanometer or 12-nanometer process.
Wait a minute. You're saying the memory stick has its own processor inside it now?
That's it. You got it. The memory isn't just dumb storage anymore. It has processing and memory capabilities. It can do basic math, it can do data filtering, it can do logic operations before it even sends the data to the main GPU.
It's like having a smart librarian who summarizes the book for you before handing it over instead of making you read every single page.
That is a perfect analogy. It offloads so much work from the main chip, which makes the whole process insanely efficient and therefore cheaper.
That sounds incredibly difficult to manufacture. You're stacking processors on top of memory.
It is. It's a nightmare. And that's the war. You have the HBM trio, SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron. Right now, SK Hynix is the king. They formed a one-team alliance with TSMC, the chip manufacturer. They're basically unbeatable at the moment.
But Samsung is trying to fight back. I've read they're pouring billions into this.
Samsung is the integrated titan. They're trying a turnkey strategy because they do everything, the memory, the logic chip, and the final packaging, all in-house. They're betting the farm on a technology called hybrid bonding.
Hybrid bonding? What's that?
Imagine you're stacking silicon chips. Normally, you use tiny little bumps of solder to connect them. With hybrid bonding, you polish the copper interconnect so perfectly smooth down to the atomic level that you just press the chips together and the copper atoms fuse. Copper to copper.
No solder.
No solder. It allows you to create much denser connections and stack 16 layers of memory high. They call it 16 high, in an incredibly tiny space. It's a huge gamble.
And Micron, the third player.
Micron is the scrappy underdog, but the demand is so astronomical that they sold out of their entire HBM capacity for the next year instantly. Even third place in this war is a gold mine.
And the winner of this corporate war is Amara in Lagos.
Yes. Because these companies are slitting each other's throats to make faster, denser, smarter memory, the cost per token just plummets. It democratizes access to high-level intelligence. Amara doesn't need to be in Silicon Valley or have $1 million in VC funding anymore. The institutionalized scarcity of compute just evaporates.
So let's zoom out here. We have Lena escaping censorship with her sovereign hardware. We have Kalen escaping the energy grid with his own nuclear power. And now we have Amara escaping the cost barrier thanks to this insane memory war. It feels like the individual is winning, but what about the big guys? What about nations?
This is the geopolitical layer.
Yeah.
And it is getting very, very messy. Because if Elena can have a ghost node in her basement, So can France. So can Japan. So can India.
We looked at that paper on sovereign AI by Schreier and Pentland. How do they define it? It's not just about earning servers, right?
No, it's more than that. They define sovereign AI as a nation's ability to develop, control, and regulate artificial intelligence independently of foreign powers.
Why does a country need that, though? Can't they just use AWS or Google Cloud like everyone else? It's efficient.
Okay, imagine you are the president of France, or India, or Brazil. And now imagine that your entire financial system, your national defense algorithms, your power grid management, and your cultural archives are all hosted on a server physically located in Virginia and owned by a U.S. corporation.
A corporation that has to comply with U.S. law and U.S. government requests.
Exactly. If the U.S. decides to sanction you, or if there's a serious diplomatic spat, they could theoretically turn off your country's intelligence. It is an unacceptable strategic risk. It is a kill switch on a national scale.
So every country wants to build their own. But building a fab, a factory, to make these Rubin chips costs what, $20 billion? Not every country can afford to do that.
No, they can't. And that's why we were seeing the rise of the hybrid model. The paper points to a company called DeepSeek as a prime example of this new path to sovereignty.
DeepSeek, I've heard of them. They put out some very powerful open models.
Exactly. The model is open and offers high-level reasoning. So a nation can take a pre-trained model like that, bring it inside their borders, and then fine-tune it on their own sovereign data, their laws, their language, their unique history, their cultural values.
So they don't need to build the chip factory from scratch. They just need to secure the compute clusters, maybe using those nuclear SMRs we talked about, and run the model locally under their own control.
That's the model. You get 90% of the benefit without the prohibitive infrastructure cost.
And I saw there's actually an organization forming around this idea, sovereignai.org.
It's a new federation. You can think of it as a kind of support group or a non-aligned movement for nations that don't want to become digital colonies of Silicon Valley. It allows them to pool resources and figure out federated AI governance while maintaining their independence.
This connects right back to my dinner party. My diesel friend wants global regulation. He wants a single world safety committee to decide who gets to have these powerful chips.
Of course he does.
But sovereign AI is basically the entire world of nation states saying, no, thank you.
It is the nation-state equivalent of Elena's ghost ode. Nations are refusing to let the safety priesthood in Palo Alto dictate their technological future. They are building their own engines on their own terms.
It really is a theological shift. We've moved from a world where we thought we could put the genie back in the bottle to a world where everyone is 3D printing their own bottles.
And their own genies to go inside them.
So let's try and bring this all together. We started at a dinner party with a guy sweating over the idea of unmetered compute. We've gone through the specs of the Rubin GPU, that insane 50 petaflops and 22 TBs of bandwidth, and seen how it breaks the tether to the cloud.
Right. From the individual up.
Then we've looked at the physics at nuclear SMRs and the Kardashev scale, showing how the energy problem gets solved. We've seen the HBM4 memory war crashing the costs for entrepreneurs like Amara in Lagos. And now we've seen entire nations scrambling for autonomy.
And the connecting thread through all of it is that the D-cell worldview is fighting against physics and economics. It's a losing battle. You cannot regulate away the efficiency gains of HBM4. You cannot legislate away the energy density of uranium.
And you can't convince a sovereign nation or a determined sovereign individual to voluntarily handicap their own intelligence.
The thermodynamic reality, as you put it in your intro, is that intelligence expands to fill the available energy and compute. It's a natural law.
So we're moving from a model of high priests in California dispensing API tokens
to a world of sovereign believers generating their own cognitive fire.
And that fire is spreading incredibly fast. You know, we often think of safety as a set of brakes on a car. We argue about who should have their foot on the pedal, who gets to steer. But the Rubin architecture suggests that the car has already transformed into a rocket.
That's a good way to put it.
The debate is no longer about who gets to drive. It's about who owns the engine. And as we've seen, the engine is getting smaller, faster, and distributed to everyone from Elena in her basement to Amara in Lagos. The cognitive fire hasn't just been stolen from the gods, it's been open sourced. The question isn't, can we control it anymore? The question is, what happens when the entire planet starts thinking at 50 petaflops?
That is the question we all need to start preparing for.